Hello again. My name's Sean Brillant. I'm with the Canadian Wildlife Federation, and if you're joining us here, this is our follow-up video to the webinar we held earlier this week with Tonya Wimmer from the Marine Animal Response Society, who joins me now. This follow-up video is intended for us to get through the questions we did not have time to answer during the webinar, and so we wanted to take the time to make sure that we addressed and tried to answer each of the questions that came in. So we're just going to go through the questions that were submitted to us and try and give you an answer. So hi, Tonya.
Hey, Sean.
Okay, pardon me. I'm going to bounce back and forth between windows here as I'm reading the questions. So here's some of the questions that are going to come in, and I'll let Tonya answer them. So one question here: how are animals transported from the site where they are found to a lab where you can perform necropsies?
Yes, so as probably can imagine, a lot of people don't necessarily like to put animals in the back of their vehicles. We generally, when we try to move an animal, we try to make sure that it's packaged up and, so that everything is contained. We're very fortunate that for ourselves, we actually have a few trailers and also a truck that we can put it in the back. But there are times that people very generously have put it into, if it's small enough, put it into a small tub and put it in the back of their car and leave all the windows down. Yeah. The most fun we actually have with that, in a sense, even though it's a very unfortunate situation, is that we will often take those animals over to the vet college where they'll do the necropsies on site. And it's always interesting to be driving down the highway with a big dolphin in the back and people looking in and kind of wondering what you've got sticking out of the various bits. So
flapping around out the back.
Yeah, pretty much.
But there's sort of an upper limit even then. I mean, you can only fit maybe
so much. Yeah. I mean, anything sort of above, for the biggest animals we've moved have been sort of small size pilot whales, but anything bigger than that, we usually are relying on either fisheries or notions or someone in the community to be able to help us with either a bigger truck, or even flatbed trucks have been used to take some very sort of precious and rare species even over.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm not sure if that's been done here, but certainly in the US, I've even seen them move large whales to appropriate necropsy locations.
Yes, yeah, they did that a few times with some of the ones in a few years ago with some of the right whales that were in the Gulf. So having to put them on a very large, take them out using almost boat lifts and then put them on a very large flatbed to be able to take them to the appropriate site for necropsy.
But in many cases, it's pretty easy, especially if you've got little harbor porpoises and so on.
Yeah, the smaller ones definitely make it easier, that's for sure. You can actually physically pick them up with a few people. Yeah, although they're surprisingly much heavier than you would think because they're sheer muscle.
Yeah, all dense.
So they're deceiving, yeah.
Solid, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. How many volunteers on average are brought to a stranding site?
Yes, so that will depend on exactly what it is we're dealing with. So for example, if in the case of something like that, where it is a small animal, we may take 3 or 4 people because again, because they're deceivingly heavy, you also want to keep people safe and make sure people aren't lifting, things that are way too heavy for 1 or 2 people. However, when we go to do something like the larger whale necropsies or deal with mass strandings, even a single stranding, we try to have, anywhere from 10 to 30 or so people, especially when you get into those big right whale the big right whale necropsies.
Yeah.
I think last year we on average had somewhere between 25 to almost 40 people to be able to deal with the actual sheer magnitude of the situation.
Right. And I have a side question. I just want to pop in just to keep you on your toes. Of course, it's going to depend on how, like, for example, with a mass stranding, it's going to depend on how big it is. There are gigantic, unfortunate mass strandings that occur in the Southern Ocean and New Zealand, like hundreds of, small cetaceans will wash up. But we've had some big ones here as well. What's the biggest?
We have.
Maybe? What's the biggest you've dealt with?
The biggest one we've dealt with, we had a mass stranding of pilot whales, which are anywhere between 10 to 20 something feet long, and we had about 16 of those in one event. I know in the past, before I was involved in this, there have been ones of up to 60, and we never ever really want to have to deal with one that large. Even 16 animals, you start to, even for us with 16 animals and they're all alive, you not only have a situation where you need to have a lot of people there that are maybe your volunteers who have some level of training, but you actually need members of the public. Yeah. And because you wouldn't be able to do it without having at least 4 or 5 people per animal.
Right.
And so we've done that before, where we basically just sort of bring people in, give them all the basics, make sure we have someone who's watching everyone. But it's just not even possible in some of the sheer magnitude of those cases to not have enough people.
And we've been lucky. 16 is pretty bad. And if you've got,
Yeah.
5 or 6 people on each whale, that's a lot of work, and then a lot of coordination for the specialists like you as well. Hopefully that doesn't happen. Occasionally we get large whale strandings as well, right? There was a sperm whale stranding. Large,
Oh yes. Oh yes. We even had mass strandings of sperm whales. I mean, one December that was in northern New Brunswick, and it was like December 6th, in a spot where people really didn't even know we had sperm whales, let alone live sperm whales. And then it was December. So that was, and I mean, in some cases, especially when you get animals that big, there are decisions to be made about what you can do, or if you try something, the biggest thing is you never want to do something that's actually going to hurt the animal more, so that you put them back in the water and then suddenly they can't swim because you've done something to their spine. And so there are cases where unfortunately the animals but you basically just have to let nature take its course and keep them comfortable, which is one of the most horrible decisions to have to make, but it's also one that's never made lightly or without a lot of consultation with the vets and fisheries and oceans.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we made that point, but that's an important thing. It's not a simple matter of grabbing an animal by the tail and dragging it back to the beach. I mean, in ways that might be the same as grabbing a person by their pinky and dragging them, right? Something's gonna
or by their neck. Yeah. I mean, it's instinct for people that, they see an animal, especially if it's sort of small enough that they can, think they can maneuver it. And it looks like a perfect handle, right? You grab the tail, you pull. But like you said, you're now pulling the entire mass of an animal from one of the smallest points on their body. And their tail doesn't actually have any bones in it. So it really is just like small vertebra going to the end. And if you pull, you can actually dislocate their spine or even sever their tail. And so that's why the specialists exist and do what they do in terms of how you best handle the animal. And because no one wants to hurt them further, but people just don't understand that.
And how many on that sperm whale mass stranding, how many whales were there?
4. 4 juvenile males, because we get sort of that age group around here, and they were easily in the range of 40 to almost 50 feet long.
Yeah.
And then it was cold. So, I mean, they didn't last long. It wasn't possible to actually get those guys off the beach, and they perished pretty quickly, but they were mammoth animals. And they're amazingly beautiful animals, but that's definitely never the situation you want to see them in.
And such a crazy opportunity to see them, and such a crazy opportunity for science and everything else. These are beasts out of legends, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I've forgotten where I was.
I know, and so you got distracted.
Sunfish. Why might sharks and sunfish show up on beaches? Is it usually because they are injured?
Yes. So, I mean, that's quite the interesting. I mean, as our name sort of implies, it's marine animal response. And so actually, I should mention the response part is very specific as well, because like we just mentioned, there are times our response is actually to help them out of their misery. So it isn't always about surviving and refloating them and putting them back in. But it's also marine animals. So we deal with anything that's pretty much big in the ocean, whales, dolphins, seals, turtles. We work with a group to be able to deal with them. And then, of course, sharks and sunfish, which seem to be happening with a little more regularity. So every year we probably get several calls involving blue sharks, sometimes basking sharks, which are huge animals. And lately, mola molas, so the ocean sunfish, which is not a tiny fish. It's a 6-foot diameter behemoth. And of course, when you're dealing with sunfish and sharks, they're not like whales and seals and whatnot that they can breathe when they're out of the water. With those guys, it usually is a much more, you have to be much quicker in the response. And sometimes it's just not possible because they have been out of the water too long.
Right.
Why they all of a sudden appear on beaches is a bit of a mystery. With sunfish, it seems to be like what we see with some of the whale species, that they get into places like in the back parts of the Bay of Fundy and the tide just drops out under them. So sometimes it could just be they're following food. I mean, they're eating jellyfish, so they're close to shore, and it could just be that they get stuck somewhere, or the tide goes out without them sort of paying attention, which happens to dolphins and whales too.
Yeah. And the point you make is important. I'll reiterate that is there is a freshwater sunfish that people fish for in lakes, but this is not the same. These are ocean sunfish.
Yes.
Sometimes they're called molas. And as Tonya was saying, they look like giant discs about 6 feet around, and
cool with huge flippers, and they actually swim this way, and they're absolutely incredible animals. But to move one we had one here just outside of Halifax a few years ago that was alive, and and with our responder Andrew Reed trying to move it, and it's not an easy feat because they're actually oriented even completely the other way, and their flippers are in the way. But they're very tricky to be able to deal with, but we're working on a system for that.
Very cool. Someone was asking about the dangers involved with necropsies on animals. I assume they're talking about like human safety considerations.
Yes, and so I mean that's probably the other reason I mean, because a lot of people think, oh, it's a dead animal. There's, obviously the animal's not thrashing about. It isn't a chance it could bite you or something like that, or blow, and then there's diseases in their blow that you could contract. But there are dangers basically in every sort of aspect of the work that people do. And dead animals are no different, because it is sort of that investigative process, which means, with an animal that's you can bring in and put on a bench, it's very controlled. You have only so many people, the animal's tiny. When you're dealing with something that's really big, you're often in a situation where there are people working on both sides of an animal and you cannot see each other. And there's knives. And we also use an excavator. So there's a whole lot of safety concerns. And so we always have at least one, if not two people who their job is to watch and keep track of where people are going to be climbing. And this is, in this state, these animals are slippery because you're starting to open them up. You've got a backhoe who's helping you move pieces and bones out of the way. And so we very much, with any situation, having personal protection equipment is always very important. Gloves, masks, eyeglass wear, appropriate clothing. But when we deal with large whales, you're now adding in even more knives and slippery, surfaces and stuff. So it is very dangerous, but it's also why we are exceptionally controlled about how it is done and who's involved.
And heavy things as well. Big bones, big chunks of blubber and meat. So.
Oh yeah, that's the biggest thing. Even when we deal with the right whales, that big beautiful blubber layer that they have, which makes them that nice round sort of beach bally kind of an animal. But when you actually have to open them up and you've got a foot thick of blubber coming down in an 8-foot sheet, that's again why it has to be exceptionally controlled and done by the experts.
Great. Okay, let's move along here. This is a good question. I'd seen this one come up, but I didn't think we'd have time to deal with it. So someone was asking how you prepare emotionally and mentally to respond to these events or to perform necropsies, and particularly if you bring in new folks in. That's a really good question.
It's a very, very good question, actually. And it's one of those things that I think until we really hit 2017 and then 2019, the full weight of what you're dealing with, it's, we do necropsies and whatnot throughout a year, and they're sort of spaced out. And a lot of the time it's, whether the animal, it was an accident, or they got caught somewhere and they just couldn't get out, whether they were ill. And so for many animals, it's very much the scientific process that we just do to make sure we're collecting all the information and understanding what happened to them. And not that it isn't emotional in those cases, because I've been studying whales for almost 20 years. And so anytime you see them, it's devastating to see, but then it's also absolutely fascinating from that scientific point of view for what we can learn. And especially then that contribution to science and science, research done by many people. But it is very different, for example, when we deal with not only the mass strandings where you've got live animals or even a single animal and you're hearing them, but then when we deal with necropsies of the right whales, for example, where you are now dealing with a critically endangered species, and you're seeing many and many and many that are died, and knowing that most of them are because of human activities.
Right.
So I think most people understand that that's why they die, but to actually physically have to get the initial reports right through to doing the complete necropsy, and then probably the worst thing that we have to do is then turn around and do presentations to a giant group of people who study these species and have been trying to protect them for 40 years and tell them why all these 12 animals died and then why all these 9 died. And it gets to be, it's one of those things. I think the way that we sort of prepare in the sense is that we go in and we do our job. And it's the same with the vets we work with. It's all of our volunteers, all the DFO people. It does not mean that people aren't emotionally invested or strained by that. If anything, I think we have to keep that in a different part of our brain. Yeah. For new people coming in, it depends. Sometimes it depends a little bit on who they are. We get a wonderful opportunity to have a lot of veterinary students come in. And this is not something that many veterinary students get to actually do. Yeah. And so for them to be able to see a large mammal like that, it's not a horse and it's not a cow, it's something so much bigger, is absolutely fascinating. And it is quite, while some people might think it's a bit weird, but it is quite interesting to actually see these minds that will later go out and be these amazing veterinarians get to actually experience something like that and discuss it. It's always fascinating to hear the vets discuss this. But even for all of us who've been doing this, and in the end, I think we did 12 necropsies or so over those 3 years. The first year, it got to be exceptionally weighing by the time we got to the last animal. And we didn't really feel the full weight of it until we had left the site and probably had a chance to look at the reports and put together the big reports. And that's when it starts to hit you. The other thing is these animals were known, most of them. So people knew their lives. People
What
knew.
I was going to say is, I mean, I've seen these presentations, and when you do these presentations, even to an audience of professional whale scientists, it's a very emotional response that everyone gets, because
Oh yeah.
punctuation, which was one of the whales you talked about the other day, was a 40-year-old grandmother who was, had
Had 8 babies,
kids and
2 grandkids. And
yeah,
and I mean, and the thing there too, and I think that was one of the difficult things, even in between both years, or that because we have this wonderful, incredible community of people who've been studying them. Anytime a whale was found, we within almost minutes would get the history of this animal. Like, here's who it is. This is, the age. This is how many babies they had had. I mean, with punctuation, it was that she had 8 children, essentially 8 calves and two grandbabies, and almost all of them had died or been hurt because of human activity. So like her whole line, except for a few kids, are gone, and almost all of them because of human activity. So it was interesting, even between 2017 to 2019, the emotional transition of the people involved, because it was the same core team that did all of these necropsies from Quebec and PEI and with DFO and with ourselves. And we transition a little bit between being exceptionally upset to keep hearing about a new one, and we'd be on whales and getting a report of another one, which was really hard. The second year in 2019, I think we started to get a bit angrier. I think people were starting, I mean, and still not eliminating that emotional connection to these animals, but because of it, it was just getting to be, why are we doing this again? Why do we have to still be here? Why can't we solve this?
I definitely think it could take a lot of preparation and understanding for people to be able to deal with that. It is interesting. Like, even, I remember the other day we were talking about how beautiful Wolverine, or whichever whale it was you were showing, the colorations on their chin and belly. They're beautiful, right? But of course, it's also sad. You're looking at the whale. It's the same with the idea of witnessing a mass stranding of sperm whales, which is ultimately tragic and terrible. But at the same time, you get struck by the majesty and magnitude of these things, right? So,
well, I think, and for some of us who do this work, I mean, my background is a whale biologist and doing whale conservation, but I mean, there is something absolutely fascinating about being able to see these, like, these unfortunate events, but then being able to see them. I mean, it's part of the even, expanded the reason I fell in love with these animals, especially because if you understand, they're mammals like us, they're laid out, everything inside is laid out just like us, but they can do some pretty incredible things, dive 4 kilometers, hold their breath for 2 hours. It's phenomenal what they can do. And you can see it in the way that they're put together. And that's impressive. It's, and a heart the size of a small car.
It's amazing. I like that. Okay.
Sorry, we'll get distracted.
I know it's easy to keep talking about these. Okay. Someone asked if ropeless technology is close to used in the Maritimes.
I'm glad that they actually asked this question, because I mean, I think that's the other side is, and you'll be able to speak to this even better than I am, but it's, I mean, the idea of why we do the necropsies and why we investigate is to try to help figure out what needs to be done to protect them. And that's probably been the biggest thing out of these necropsies on right whales over the last 40 years, but especially the last 3 here are, they were being killed by being hit by vessels, and some of them died because they were entangled in fishing gear, and some were swimming around with entanglements alive. And so, I mean, that's been the whole thing, is the drive towards, well, what can we do to change that? And I know, I mean, from the work you guys do at CWF, I mean, you're working right on the ground with fishermen about ropeless technology. And so, I mean, I'd be curious to hear a little more about how that rolled out this year.
A short answer is that it's coming along, and it's not only just groups like ours that are trying to develop it. Fishing associations are developing it as well. They see it as a solution to try and allow them to fish wherever they want to fish without posing a risk to whales. So the short answer is it's coming along. There are groups that are testing it. There are tests that are going on with different types of technology, and some of it is being helped by non-governmental organizations like ours, and some of it is being driven directly by the fishing industry as well. So anyway, short answer is it's coming along for sure.
Which is fabulous, though. I mean, because that's the thing, is I think, there's, because you see this, and we've seen this stuff for the 20 years we've both been doing work on bycatch around, fishermen sort of being that villain of, they're caught a whale, and I've never ever met a fisherman who's trying to catch a whale. Absolutely not. And they're as upset about it as we are, but it's also their livelihood. And so that's the thing, is if there's a way to work together to figure out how to still do that, and the whales still have access to their habitat, that's a win-win for everyone.
Yeah, and I just realized I should backtrack a little for others who are listening in if they don't know what ropeless technology
Right.
is.
Sorry.
What this is this question is referring to the development of new fishing technology that eliminates the need for a buoy line. And so that sometimes it's called buoyless, sometimes it's called ropeless fishing, because what will often happen is you've got a lobster trap or a crab trap on the bottom of the ocean, and then a buoy and a piece of rope that connects to a buoy at the surface. And that piece of rope, the buoy line or end line or warp line, whatever you want to call it, is often what we figure is what's entangling whales as whales collide with it. so so that's where they're trying to eliminate the need for that. And so there are different systems that allow them. Sometimes it's a bottom stowed rope, and then the buoy will be released and pull the rope to the surface, so then they can be pulled aboard. Others will be lift bag systems. Anyway, just wanted to give some background on what that ropeless technology was.
Well, and the wonderful thing, like you said, Sean, is that there's so many Canadian fishermen fishing associations who are testing it, who are driving that technology so that it can actually become readily available and usable across fleets, which is phenomenal. They're on the front lines of conservation from that perspective for right whales.
No, everyone is trying to find a way to solve this problem.
Yeah.
Okay, a few more questions. Someone asked if there is research going on around noise pollution and cetacean strandings in Nova Scotia.
Yes. So, I mean, that's another, I mean, not often we don't talk that much about that threat. And I think the big thing is for all whales, not just right whales, but all whales, there are a number of things that can harm them. And we've talked about entanglements and we've talked about vessel strikes, which are probably the most direct. It actually physically grabs them, hurts them in some way. But of course, there are a number of other things like chemicals in our ocean, plastic that's just floating around and being ingested or being caught up on them. And then noise is also another one, in the sense that these environments are increasingly getting noisier and noisier from the activities, mostly from us, a lot of vessels and things, from commercial stuff, from recreational. And so that's been another question, is around, well, how does that impact, especially whales, because their primary sense, like ours is vision for the most part, theirs is sound, using sounds kind of like bats to be able to figure out where they are, where their babies are, where the food is, to move around. And so adding in extra layers of noise makes it cloudy. Essentially, it's like being in a noisy hall. And if you want to talk to someone on the other side of the room, it's fine if no one else is there or no one's making sound. As soon as a party's going on, you can't hear them anymore. You can't talk to them. And so there's been a lot of, because we have a lot of activity on this coast and we have a lot of oil and gas activity, a lot of fishing, there's a lot of recreational stuff going on. It's been in people's minds for a long time. And it's one of those things, it's very tricky to deal with, say, a dead animal and figure out if noise was the issue, because you really have to get to the animal really soon after it's died. It has to be fairly fresh to be able to still see the signs of some of those impacts. However, there's other work that's actually going on with live whales, which is looking at potential impacts from noise by basically monitoring their health, looking at how stressed they are, looking at, people going around collecting the blow from some of these whales just swimming around and seeing if they are seemingly increasingly stressed. There was a study done a number of years ago, which sadly followed the events of 9/11, and people happened to have been monitoring right whales and the hormones from them and saw that they seemingly became less stressed right after. And a lot of that was anticipated to be because there were very few boats and there was a lot less shipping at that point. People have asked the same question this year because of the pandemic. Obviously, a lot of other activities have slowed down or stopped, or we don't have cruise ships. And there are a lot of people who are already monitoring the noise levels and want to monitor the animals to see if we're seeing reduced stress, which, for the reasons why we care about stress, is because if you think about yourself, if you get stressed, it makes it much harder to do anything. And for whales, especially right whales, it seems to be related to how well they can have babies, which is hugely important for a very small critically endangered species. We need them to be able to do what they do, and we shouldn't be adding stress to that.
Yeah, good. Okay, someone else was asking about the use of remote sensing technology in response efforts. You want to talk a bit about how you use remote sensing? And in this case, we are taking this, I think, to mean the different technology that exists that could be detect or develop a response for a marine animal emergency of some sort.
Yeah, I think that's the thing with, there's a lot of technology that actually exists in terms of either studying whales that are happy, healthy, and live, or in the realm of the response and whatnot that we do. I mean, over the years, obviously the addition of technology, and especially when making it more readily available, has increased our ability to do a number of things. Things like drones actually allow us to be able to search beaches when you need to deal with an animal here, but say it's a pilot whale and they normally strand in a group. Well, you either have to have someone walk down an entire beach, or you can now send drones.
Right.
People have been talking about the use of drones with entangled whales from a perspective of, with a whale that's entangled, you often only have one or two approaches to get in there, see what's going on, and then try to get the gear off. But if you can fly a drone over, you might be able to get a much better picture so that you can go in as prepared as possible for what you need to do and not disturb the animal.
Right.
We recently actually just received, we're an ambassador for a company called Deep Trekker, which has big like underwater ROVs, so remotely operated vehicles. And we became an ambassador with them because we wanted to see about the use of these ROVs to help us examine dead floating whales, which we very often, for most species other than a right whale, we don't get them brought ashore. There's no support to do that. And so we've been looking at, well, how can we use drones and other technology to help us investigate them, even if it's at sea, as much as we possibly can. The technology has actually expanded the way in which we can even visualize what's going on, and also to help us, better study these animals, or, save the legs of some poor volunteers who are going to have to wander kilometers looking for other animals.
Right. I think it has made a big difference. I even recall last year, the perspective when you're trying to look at a whale that's in distress or entangled from a boat, and you're looking over at this animal that's partly submerged, you can't really see what's going on. And I've heard even from the aerial drones from the last couple of years, it's provided a lot of surprising insights when you start looking at the problem from above, and you're like, oh, there's two whales there, or
it's even more complex, or there's a trap that you didn't know was there. And I mean, and the biggest thing too is, the added benefit is not only it'll help them figure out how to deal with it for the animal, but it's mainly about keeping the people safe, especially for things like disentanglement. It's so that they are as prepared as possible going in. And these extremely well-trained experts that we have, very luckily in Canada, they have the best information going in as possible.
I want to mention as well, because it's a common question, a lot of people ask about the opportunity of sending drones in to deal with the disentanglement or to help an animal.
Yeah.
This technology is not at that point just yet. This is far too complicated of an operation for these.
Yeah, and people have talked about that with ROVs as well. Like, couldn't they just have, cutters on them and things like that? And I mean, I think we can see why that would be the thought, especially because we want to be in a world where these people, and even ourselves doing necropsies, we're all out of a job. We don't have to do it from that perspective anymore. And I know the disentanglement folks would share that sentiment as well. But I mean, the technology isn't quite there to have something remotely go in, especially not for something up close to the animal. These are also animals that are swimming. They're probably, in the most part, sometimes animals that are upset, and you need to be very nimble. And the animal itself moves a lot sometimes while this is happening. So it is about trying to get in and make the right cuts, but you may not actually have good access with an ROV. But maybe, hopefully in the future, there will be. Hopefully in the future, we won't have to worry about it because there won't be any entangled whales.
Right, even better. Someone had sent in a question saying that they had a harbor porpoise skeleton, and they're wondering what they can do in terms of donating it, and how to go about doing that. Do you want to?
Yeah. So, well, and we get this question quite a lot because, it's one of those things that if, people are beach going and they find a bone on the beach, they're often, they take it home, or it has, been inherited down through the family line, kind of a thing, that there's this literally a porpoise in the attic or something. And it's wonderful in the thought that if people do have those, the thought of, how can they share it? Who can they provide it to? And museums and other sort of academic institutions often will take bones. People, like in groups like at the New Brunswick Museum, for example, the Nova Scotia Museum, the New Brunswick Museum has one of the largest whale parts and bits and awesome collection, east of Ontario, and it's phenomenal. And so even there's ways to sort of donate it back to some of those academic institutions.
Right. And they make a big difference in that situation, because although they've got hundreds of whale skeletons there, they're not just collecting dust, they get used for research as well. And
yes. Oh my goodness. Yes. Yeah. That's the one, the real gem of being able to archive this information is that, years later, and we've seen it years later, people go to museums all over the world and are doing, getting little bone cores to do genetics on beaked whales that we've never understood before. So it's an invaluable collection.
This is it's a very helpful thing to be able to donate to these museums, I think. The other thing I just want to mention is occasionally someone is looking for a display, like someone would want an institution or something might want to put up a display or something. Those are more difficult to find. And my feeling is probably organizations like yours, network coordinating organizations like yours would probably be the best place to contact if someone had a skeleton and was wondering what to do with it. Because then at least you would know who to best send it to. So I might best as an answer that you and similar organizations to you across the country be the ones that people contact.
For sure, that people can contact, for sure. And I mean, even when we've dealt with necropsies, you know, we very often have people asking us about, can they get specimens or whole skeletons for different displays? Right. I mean, when we did the right whales in 2017, there's one skeleton that went to the Royal Ontario Museum, and there's another one that hopefully will be hanging at the Gulf Science Center when it's finished in Moncton for DFO themselves. So, I mean, and the thing is, and these are in themselves, the education value of even just being able to see a skeleton is, it dwarfs you. It makes you feel very tiny.
Okay. Okay, I think there's a few more questions, but they're all of the same thing. Most of them are saying how glad I am to see this work is happening here. They're pleased to see that this kind of work is being done. Many people are expressing that they have experience as veterinary technicians or working in vets and aquariums and would be interested to know if they can get involved and how they can help. These are certainly the kind of people you probably could use very much, eh?
Oh, yes. I mean, and that's the thing is that, as I mentioned the other day, I mean, we do take volunteers. And so anyone who is interested, we would encourage them to contact our volunteer coordinator, and you can go on our website under the volunteer tab and it'll give you information on how to do that. I mean, we take volunteers from every walk of life, with an exception of not very young people, because obviously we need to keep everyone safe. But yeah, I mean, anyone in our communities, because I mean, number one, like we said the other day, is sort of there's those 3 tiers of how people can get involved. And the first one is just having the number and knowing it for when if you happen to see anything from the air, on land, on the water. And you know, the second thing is volunteering. If they want to be able to help, and if they don't have to have veterinary be a technician, they don't have to be, you know, a PhD in whales. It's anybody can actually help, although we will take everybody. Yes. You know, having vets and vet techs is we're very, very fortunate for the number that are here or have retired here. And so people can also sign up to be a volunteer, or again, like we said, you know, letting us know if they maybe have resources in the community. You know, people who own excavation companies are very lovely, wonderful people. And we've been very fortunate to work with many. That's and right. They let us come back, which is always very nice. Yeah. And then, of course, the third level is the people engaging with the government and engaging with their MPs and talking about oceans and commenting on things like the action plan that is up for public comment right now. But yes, most definitely, if people want to volunteer, they just have to let us know.
Especially if they've got that experience dealing with large animals or large animal bodies. Those are very
or don't mind, even if they don't, but don't mind, you know, smell and getting involved and helping us in any way. Yeah. So and the thing is, we never make anyone do something they're not comfortable with. If you really don't want to deal with smelly dead things, you don't.
Yeah. And
it's just something worthwhile put out there.
And you provide the training that's necessary. You're not asking for anyone to do anything they're not trained to do as well.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
And this would go, I think, for you who sort of deal with the maritime-based volunteers. Once again, people can go and check out the networks in Quebec and Newfoundland and BC and do the same sort of things and contact the network coordinators who know and can identify where there's opportunities for people to get involved. So that's very.
I mean, I think that's the one big thing is, I mean, across the whole country. I mean, Canada is very fortunate. We have this amazingly long coastline, but when you only have a handful of people who run response networks, it's an amazingly long coastline. So having people in our coastal communities who can at least even go out and do the first peek and say, yeah, that actually is a whale on the beach, or no, that actually is a moose, or it's a rock, or it's something not even animal. You know, it makes a huge difference in, you know, the Maritimes are kind of small, but you picture Newfoundland, BC, Quebec, a lot of coastline.
In the Maritimes, and I know you deal with it as well, we're both based here in Halifax, and then you get a call for a stranding of a sperm whale in northern New Brunswick. Well, there's a 6-hour drive just to get there and check it out. I know the teams in Newfoundland deal with even larger drives, and so crucially important for sure.
Yeah, volunteers are incredible.
The last thing, several people had written in expressing appreciation and enthusiasm for this, and they were wondering if there's funding to hire more people in these areas, and others had been asking how they can support this work as well. And we talked a little bit about this, but I thought we would just conclude here talking and reminding people about that. These are nonprofit charitable organizations. You're a charitable organization.
Yep.
There is some support that these groups are receiving from the Government of Canada, but it is far from sufficient for developing what we need to do here. So there is always opportunities for support. If people want to make donations, they can contact you or the other networks or the other NGOs in the different provinces, depending on where they are, and provide donations that way. And, getting back to the point that you made, sometimes it's not always even donations that are necessary, cash donations that are necessary, equipment and opportunities are big helps as well. So I just want
most definitely. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, and information about how to support Mars is on our website, and I know it is on the networks for the other groups as well. And I mean, that's we started this in 1999 as the Marine Animal Response Society. And I mean, I was an undergrad student in Hal Whitehead's lab at Dalhousie studying whales. And it starts with just very bare bones and an awful lot of people who are very keen. We've been very fortunate to be able to grow it to at least a few more people than just me and one other person. We have now 3 other people who are part-time, but it takes a lot. And the scale of what is done is pretty phenomenal, but it is only possible because we have the support from people in our communities, either physically support on beaches or because they donate. And it's exceptionally encouraging to us, and it has been over the years. As at times this has not always been sort of the thing that has been supported by our federal government. We've been very fortunate the last few years that there has been a lot more interest and a lot more support. Right. It does only go a certain ways. But that's where we've been very fortunate to have people in our communities who, even in a moment where we know we need to look at something, and the number of times now that I will get a message from a local fisherman who says, do you need to get out there and see that whale? I have a boat. Right. And I mean, that just shows the power of our communities and the fact that people are interested in these events and how much they're willing to help each other. Mm. And I think that speaks volumes for what we're actually able to accomplish.
Yeah, so that's important. I do want people to remember that.
Yeah.
Let me take a quick look. Yep, that's all my notes. So that's all the questions, all the other questions that we've had. In fact, probably more than the questions we had, since I like asking questions too. So yeah, well, thank you, Tonya, for coming on again and answering these questions and having a conversation with us about response in the first place. It's something that really grabs everyone's attention, and obviously we had such great reaction from the questions and listeners that people are really enthused by what you're doing as well.
Yeah, no, and we really appreciate the opportunity. I mean, both to you and OTN, and also to Big Spruce for, the endeavors of the Tag Your It, beer, which is fabulous. And like I said, we were one of the recipients in one of the early years during some of the hardest of our times. And that in itself is huge, that there's just that support and the room to have these kinds of talks and platforms so that people can learn more about what's going on. Yeah. And especially how they can help is great.
And everyone can keep paying attention because the story's still going on for this year. And at least now, that's why I like having these conversations. People, I think, are a bit more equipped to understand what a necropsy might be going on. And they can
exactly
this year and the years to come, because it's going to be a long haul for us to help these whales out. So Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We'll talk to you again soon.
Excellent. Thank you very much.